The work of the early modern philosophers falls right into place when we consider their epistemological and metaphysical musings in their context, alongside the new science. But that as an exclusively mathematical physics, styled after the rational mechanics of Archimedes and the other mixed mathematical sciences, rather than as an experimental physics. For we find that a mathematical physics that values deduction, as was exemplified by Newton even more so before him, and as rational mechanics and optics were always performed, aligns perfectly with the Cartesian epistemology and the project of a universal algebra explicitly stated to achieve the certainty of mathematics about physical problems. The philosophers of the 17th century had the intention of drawing up blueprints and laying the foundations of the new science as something that could contend with scholasticism. And their epistemological and metaphysical work should be interpreted thus. Hence Hobbes' strict adherence to a mixed mathematical physics, whereby the that is found physically, and the explanation why is demonstrated geometrically, as was always the case in mixed mathematics. And hence Leibniz developing an instrument in the calculus for adapting mathematics to continuous change, as well as, of course, Descartes' specious algebra. And finally, Newton formulating his physics after the manner of geometric deductive proofs. All of these thinkers virtually identified physics with mathematics, or a part thereof, and that by narrowing the subject of physics to only those aspects which can be treated mathematically. Thus, physics would derive the certainty and exactitude of and from mathematics. But that standard of certainty was set in Descartes' epistemological investigation and search for a method. But the early modern philosophers agreed amongst themselves and with the new science about the other part of Descartes' epistemological musings. I refer to the conspicuously excessive doubtfulness and skepticism that modern thought can seems to never be able to get rid of. We find this in Descartes' method to find a method of certainty, so to speak. A method to find a method, his method of doubt. Although that criterion of certainty is met by mathematics, with the premeditative anticipation of a mathematical physics, the doubt of skepticism was to remain for speculative thought of scholasticism. Again, although that criterion of certainty is met by mathematics, with the premeditative anticipation of a mathematical physics, the doubt of skepticism was to remain for speculative thought of scholasticism and dialectic. Thus, the philosophers of the 17th century were in unanimous agreement about the certainty of mathematical knowledge, of which they have primarily in mind the mathematical treatment of rays of light insofar as they are lines in optics, for example, and of representing physical weights as rectangular areas in mechanics. We see that in what sorts of mathematics they are interested in. Whilst retaining a unanimous doubt about what cannot factor into a mathematical problem. What they were maneuvering around and avoiding was the Aristotelian paradigm of essences thought of as the definitions of kinds of things, formulated as a species of a genus. But not only were they affirming the certainty of mathematical knowledge, they considered the matter also as to the terms or the words used in the different sciences. And this was how they subverted Aristotelian philosophy. For neither did Aristotle doubt the certainty of mathematical knowledge, nor did the early moderns think that inference should be made otherwise than deductively, if certainty is to be had. They considered the very words used to stand for mathematical things, like line, circular, as well as motion and the terms of mechanics. Those words to be obvious to all and perfectly unobscure, with definitions not contentious and not ambiguous. On the other hand, they accused the terms of metaphysics and scholastic physics of ambiguity, potential obscurity, and equivocality. This is evident when Boyle says that, quote, "I needn't tell you that the Aristotelians have complex quarrels amongst themselves regarding matter, privation, substantial forms, and so on. With the corpuscular or the mechanistic philosophy, on the other hand, men easily understand one another's meaning when they talk of motion, rest, size, shape, order, situation, and texture of material substances. I wish to emphasize that a crucial distinction drawn from thence was unanimous amongst early modern philosophers. When affirming the certainty of mathematics, they had not only in their minds geometry and arithmetic as sciences, but the very terms or words of quantitative things. They meant not mathematical objects as substances, such as triangles or numbers, but as attributes or properties of physical magnitudes. Thus, from the certainty and clarity of mathematics, they then affirm of physical bodies only certainty about their mathematical aspects. And since what we can know with certainty must exist, but not necessarily that which we cannot be sure to know, they don't just say that mathematical objects have a greater share of existence, for of that they don't care, but that the mathematical or mechanistic attributes of physical bodies are the only primary qualities of things. They maneuver, that is, from the certainty of mathematics to within the realm of physical things, a certainty about the mathematical aspects of bodies. Their concern is not mathematics. Their concern is a mathematical physics. The crucial distinction I mentioned was that between primary and secondary qualities, whereby what are classed as primary attributes of bodies are their mechanistic aspects, what can be measured, or what about things might be termed quantitative. A sort of broadened range of the term mathematical, as exemplified again by the inclusion of certain physical qualities which are adapted to mathematics in the science of rational mechanics. I mean that the quality of weight or heaviness and lightness can be interpreted quantitatively, and so is included in the mechanistic aspects of things, whereas other qualities are not. And the mechanistic aspects of things are considered as primary attributes really inherent in bodies, where everything qualitative is reduced to subjective phenomena. Only those attributes are said to really inhere in physical bodies only the quantitative aspects. Whereas what we think of as qualitative properties of bodies are said not to really inhere in them, but are dismissed as subjective phenomena. That distinction is only reached as a result of and depends upon, firstly, the ranking of mathematics as the only science that meets the criterion of certainty, and the extending of the mathematical domain through the mixed mathematical sciences into a narrowed version of physics, reduced to a sort of mixed mathematics itself. And secondly, the consideration that all linguistic terms, besides those of mathematics and mechanics, are disposed to be used ambiguously without clear and precise meaning. But again, the intention behind that is not to separate off mathematics as the only true science. Whereas that is the looks of such an analysis of the sciences, after the manner of subjecting them to the method of doubt and the criterion of certainty. A shift is then made, not to evaluate the certainty or doubtfulness of the separate sciences themselves, but to the role they might play in the science of physics. Their concern was with the attributes of physical bodies, and their evaluation of mathematics as standing apart and as being the only domain of certainty was interpreted as a reevaluation of what the primary qualities of physical bodies are, always with an eye to a mathematical physics and the new science. This Descartes' wax thought experiment. Descartes' thought experiment about the nature of wax, for example, turns the method of doubt from what kinds of things can be known to what properties of physical bodies are really inherent in them. The wax thought experiment is essential to the rearrangement of the ontological properties of physical bodies, which mathematical science and the new science requires. By turning the method of doubt from what kinds of things can be known to what properties of physical bodies are really inherent in them, setting the stage for a reclassification of the prior paradigm of substance and accident, and essential and accidental properties, and essences as categorical kinds of things. After which there is no essence of wax to be answered to by a definition as the species of a genus. There is no essence of wax for Descartes. Whereas to a peripatetic, the essence of wax might be defined as a kind of gum, or even better, the gum of trees, or something like that. After Descartes' thought experiment, there is no essence of wax, nor is wax any kind of thing to be met with by a definition as the species of a genus. He is thus removing substantial forms with that thought experiment. But wax is then no different in essence from any other physical body. For the primary attributes, the only characteristics which really belong to wax, according to Descartes, are extension and movability, which are common to all bodies in general. Thus, any quality of wax which we might say is an essential attribute of wax, without which it wouldn't be wax. Such as we would say that heat and luminosity are the essential attributes of fire, without which fire wouldn't be fire. By removing those and seeing as the only primary attributes of not just wax, but everything. By seeing as the only primary attributes of wax extension and movability, or the ability to be moved, and the mechanistic attributes, which he does not add, but which is implicit in extension. He's saying that the essential properties, not the essential properties, the primary qualities of wax are properties which are not exclusive to wax and do not factor into what makes wax to be wax. Not like we would say that luminosity is an essential attribute of fire. The essential attribute, there are no essential attributes that are specific to that kind of thing, to the substantial form, which is his target to overthrow. That fire, just like wax, the result would be the same with any body. That is the point. That fire also would have the only primary qualities, the primary attributes would be extension and movability, or the mechanistic attributes. Extension is essentially the platform for all mechanistic attributes. And that bodies are not distinguished by kinds of things anymore. Nor do they have essential attributes with which they could not be without, and with which they differ from other kinds of things. But they all have as their only primary attributes things which are common to them all: extension and movability. That's things like substantial forms, or we might just say kinds of things, really essences. And essential attributes are swept away with that wax experiment, which is fundamental to the ontological framework of the new science. And Descartes states the primacy of the mechanistic attributes of things elsewhere when he says that those things which we call by the names of light, color, odor, taste, sound, heat, cold, and the other tactile qualities, that we are not aware of there being anything other than various arrangements of the size, figure, and motions of the parts of these objects. Hence their exclusion of quality, their denial that qualities really inhere in things, and their denial, more importantly, that certain qualities are not essential attributes of kinds of things, but that everything has the same primary attributes of extension and the mechanistic, quantitative aspects. This position was unanimously held by 17th century philosophers, but is stated more clearly by some than by others. The problem is this: the mechanistic qualities, such as extension, size, weight, and the like, are common to all physical bodies alike, whereas in the Aristotelian paradigm, essential attributes distinguish essences or kinds of things. Again, whereas in the Aristotelian paradigm, essential attributes distinguish essences or kinds of things. For the mechanistic philosophy, a quality deemed primary is not primary to a certain kind of thing and doesn't distinguish one kind of substance from others. But the mechanistic attributes are primary to matter in general. Thus, the primary attributes of wax will be the same as the primary attributes of water. That is the subtle maneuver Descartes performs when, in his thought experiment about the nature of wax, he strips bodies of their qualities and concludes that the only properties really inherent in them are extension and, which is implied, the mechanistic attributes. That is, Aristotelians hold that the essential properties of fire are heat and luminosity, and levity, or lightness, and upward motion. Things without which fire would cease to be fire. And those of earth, the essential properties of earth, we would say are downward motion, or even more so, heaviness and solidity, without which something couldn't remain earthen. And by earth, we don't mean dirt, we mean solidity. But the mechanistic philosophers, by considering the heat and luminosity of fire as mere phenomena subjective to a perceiver, by considering the heat and luminosity of fire, which we would consider as essential attributes, but as they consider them as mere phenomena subjective to a perceiver and not inherent in what we call by the name of fire. And by asserting that the only attributes really inherent in fire are the same mechanistic attributes which are common to all bodies, like size, weight, motion, and the like. They really mean to say that the essence of fire is not different from that of earth or any other body, but that there are no kinds of things. Obviously, then that is a platform with which to narrow physics to what can be treated mathematically, for they are not concerned with the definitions. That's not just getting rid of qualities for its own sake. Here they have in mind something else. Here they have in mind a mathematical physics whereby they can narrow physics and exclude questions about whether or not when water evaporates into air, one substance ceases to be and another comes to be, or one substance underlies the change and is merely altered. They're able to maneuver around that by that distinction. They maneuver around those kinds of questions, whether motion is continuous or discrete, with that distinction, with which they are able to narrow physics to what only can be treated mathematically, after the manner of mechanics, which obviously does not concern itself with the sort of philosophical dilemmas which theoretical physics does, or speculative physics does. There are various ways in which that is affected throughout philosophical discourse. That same thing is affected throughout philosophical discourse in various ways. However, both that previously mentioned distinction between primary and secondary qualities and the consequential subversion of the concept of essences or kinds of things, which results from that, or which is implied in that, are unanimously held by virtually all 17th century philosophers and the new science alike. Locke does this by considering substantial forms, which were previously inseparable from their essential attributes, as mere nominal essences, established by convention. Their definitions, as the species of a genus are then mere conventional conveniences that do not define what the thing in question really is. They do not define the quiddity of what something really is. The definition of bronze as perhaps the composition of copper and tin, or something along the lines of that, accordingly specifies only as to its nominal essence, not as to what bronze is. Thus, quiddity, or the what something is, if formulating the species of a genus is meant to define that, is altogether abandoned as a nominal convention. And that has really always been the trend in modern philosophy. To say that, oh, these are just words, you're not talking about things themselves. That sort of nominalism is as much a danger today and is never contended against and is meant to subvert reason. But that is their intention of maneuvering around and avoiding the quiddity of what something is. By a maneuver of Locke, of considering substantial forms as nominal essences, as conventional conveniences, and as their definitions, and of saying that their definitions do not define the quiddity or what something is, and by distinguishing primary and secondary attributes, whereby there are no essential attributes that distinguish kinds of things, but the primary attributes are the same for fire and for earth and for wax and for anything else, that they are only to be considered mechanistically in their push-pull physics. There will then be no essence of bronze under that paradigm, when conceived as merely a nominal essence, as opposed to real essences, which they might say are the particles, the arrangement of the particles or something, which is a separate problem. Or bronze will not be a kind of substance inseparable from the essential properties of hardness, inflexibility, the ability to be sharpened, and strength. We might have before said those are the essential properties of bronze: hardness, inflexibility, the ability to be sharpened, and strength. Each of those will be deemed secondary qualities, which are not even really inherent in bronze itself, but which only relatively to a percipient arise as phenomena. The primary qualities which really inhere in bronze, they would say, are the mechanistic quantitative attributes, which are common to all physical bodies, such as size, weight, motion, rest, and the other semi-physical, semi-mathematical concepts of rational mechanics. What distinguishes metals as a different species of earthen bodies from stones, what distinguishes metals as a different species from stones, will then not be that they can be melted into a liquid, nor will that attach to metals as an inseparable and essential attribute, without which they would cease to be metallic, that they can be melted into a liquid and stones cannot. But instead, metals and stones by the quantitative amount, but instead, metals and stones will only be distinguishable by the quantitative amount of their size, texture, and weight of their parts. Thus, all physical bodies will have the same primary qualities, or attributes. They really do away with qualities, so that is to speak deceptively. of size, texture, weight, just like the concepts used or that are relevant in rational mechanics. And they only differ by the more and less, the indefinite. Those are the indefinite more and less. More and less of this size, more and less of texture, more and less of weight. They maneuver around any categorical distinctions, or by something is of this class or of that, and two things that are of that class are not more or less of that class. By devaluing essences or kinds of substances and ranking them as nominal conventions, they simultaneously exclude any quiddity, or the what something is, from scientific knowledge, whilst admitting the names of things to be allowed for convenience sake, without permitting that they really should stand for kinds of substances, and that their definitions as a species of a genus are the goal of knowing what they are. Recall that according to Aristotle, the only thing that can be the subject of definitive knowledge is quiddity, perhaps besides the why, or what something is. And that all definitions are of universals, which must be the kinds of things. That paradigm is undercut by yet another congruent maneuver, and that is this: the re-evaluation of the category of kinds of substances, or what are essences, as being only modifications of a common material substance. I should repeat that. They re-evaluate the category of kinds of substances as being only modifications of a common material substance, which they identify with extension. The kinds of substances, such as, again, metal and stone, or fire and water, instead of being kinds of substances, instead of being substances themselves, are reinterpreted as being only modifications of a common material substance. What we might have thought of as different kinds of substances would then not be substances in their own right, but would be demoted to the category of accidents. Thus, instead of metal being a substance having accidents or attributes such as essential attributes such as being able to be melted into a liquid, is then considered as a modification or an accident itself. That is, metals, instead of being substances and having attributes of their own, or having accidents of their own, are considered as accidents of a common material substance. For a modification is accidental to the substance of which it is a modification, as the identity of the substance persists through the different modifications. By considering what we would have previously thought of as substances, such as metal or stone or fire or water or man. those things that we would have previously considered as substances in their own right are considered not as substances but as modifications of a common substance, as accidents rather than substances. A modification can then not even be an essential attribute nor a primary quality of substance. Least of all could a modification be a substance.